A 6-year-old girl suffered daily from psychological cruelty and isolation imposed by her stepmother in the family mansion. No one noticed until the pet parrot, a silent witness to all the suffering, decided to act, revealing the charade and the truth behind closed doors. The Albuquerque mansion was a monument to opulence, with its impeccable gardens, bubbling fountains, and interiors that exuded luxury. But behind the facade of perfection, a shadow loomed over little Livia. At 6 years old, her large brown eyes, once full of sparkle, now held the melancholy of one living in enforced silence. That morning, as on so many others, the scent of fresh coffee and toast hung in the air of the spacious kitchen. Ricardo, Livia's father and a construction magnate, read the newspaper while his wife, Sophia, moved with the grace of a ballerina, serving coffee with a radiant smile. "Good morning, my love. Did you sleep well?" Sophia asked, her voice sweet as honey, kissing Ricardo's forehead. She was the personification of elegance, with her impeccably styled blonde hair and a silk dress that accentuated her slender figure. "Wonderfully, darling. And you? You look angelic," Ricardo replied, without taking his eyes off the economy article. He was genuinely in love with the woman who had brought light into his life after the loss of his first wife. Livia, sitting at the table, barely touched her cereal. Her feet dangled in the air, not reaching the floor, a reflection of her small stature and how out of place she felt in that environment. Sophia barely looked at her, except for a quick and superficial "Good morning, Livia," that expected no reply. The moment Ricardo finished his coffee and prepared to leave, the scene shifted. "I have an important meeting. I'll be back for dinner if all goes well," he said, kissing Sophia and waving to Livia. "Be a good girl, my love." The instant the front door closed and the sound of Ricardo's car faded away, Sophia's smile vanished. Her expression hardened, and the sweetness in her voice evaporated. "Livia, you're not going to spend the whole day with that gloomy face, are you?" she snapped, her voice now sharp. "Finish that cereal quickly and go to your room. I have important calls to make and I don't want any noise." Livia shrugged, feeling a lump in her throat. She knew what that meant. Hours of isolation in her room with her toys that no longer seemed fun. Silence was her constant companion, interrupted only by Sophia's hasty footsteps or her voice on the phone, always cheerful and sociable with others, never with her. In the corner of the living room, where sunlight streamed through the large windows, stood the cage of Loro, the family's Amazon parrot. With his vibrant green feathers and a red ring around his neck, Loro was more than a pet. He was a keen observer. His small, intelligent eyes followed every movement, every change in Sophia's tone of voice. He had witnessed the stepmother's daily metamorphosis, the transition from the perfect wife to the cold, distant figure. Livia, before going up to her exile, paused briefly near the cage. "Hi, Loro," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible. The parrot tilted his head, as if listening with unusual attention. "I wanted to play outside, but Sophia won't let me." Loro didn't respond with the usual phrases Ricardo had taught him. Instead, he let out a soft chirp, almost a lament, which Livia didn't notice, but which was an echo of what he felt. He was a mirror, absorbing the emotions and sounds of the house. Sophia's harsh words, Livia's suppressed sighs, Ricardo's tone of voice. Everything was being recorded in the bird's perceptive mind. Later, while Sophia was busy with her calls and social engagements, Livia tried to entertain herself with a coloring book. Silent tears streamed down her face, lightly staining the pages. "I wish I had my mommy," she murmured, her voice choked. "I wish Daddy would stay home." In the living room, Loro stirred on his perch. He had heard. He was hearing everything. And slowly, the seed of an idea, of an action, began to sprout in the bird's mind, driven by loyalty and the pain he saw in the little girl's eyes. The silence of the house was a symphony of cruelty and sadness, and Luro was beginning to learn the melody. In Livia's room, the vibrant colors of the coloring book seemed to mock her. She tried to fill a princess's dress with sky blue, but the tears blurring her vision made the lines come out crooked. Her teddy bear, her silent confidant, lay beside her, a witness to yet another morning of loneliness. "He doesn't love me anymore," Livia whispered to the teddy bear, her voice hoarse from holding back tears. "He only loves Sophia." Meanwhile, in the living room, Sophia was in her element. The phone was glued to her ear, and her voice, once sharp with Livia, was now a balm of sympathy and joviality. "Oh, darling, of course. Lunch at the club would be divine. I must tell you about the new jewelry collection I saw. And yes, Livia is doing great. Such a sweet and independent child. She loves spending time in her room with her books." Sophia's laughter echoed through the room, light and carefree, a sound Livia rarely heard directed at herself. Luro, perched in his cage, observed, his black, gleaming eyes fixed on Sophia, capturing every nuance of her performance. He heard the forced sweetness, the veiled falsehood in every word about Livia. The parrot bobbed his head, his green feathers ruffled slightly. It wasn't the first time he had witnessed this duality, but today something felt different. Livia's pain, so palpable, had resonated with him in a new way. Later, lunch was served in the kitchen, a silent and tense ritual. Livia sat at the table, her plate of pasta untouched in front of her. Sophia, engrossed in her tablet, barely looked up. "Eat, Livia. We don't have all day," she said, devoid of emotion, her eyes fixed on the screen. Livia tried to swallow a mouthful, but the lump in her throat tightened. She missed the time when lunch was a moment of laughter with her father before Sophia arrived. "I'm not hungry," Livia murmured, her voice almost inaudible. Sophia sighed, a sound of impatience. "Livia, don't be dramatic. You need to eat to grow strong. Now, no more talking. Finish your plate." Livia felt tears well up again. She didn't dare to cry openly, fearing Sophia's reprimand. Instead, she pushed the food around her plate, her eyes fixed on the window where the sun shone outside, inviting her to play. "I wish I could play outside," she thought, the phrase echoing in her mind. In the living room, Luro, who had been moved to a spot where he could observe the kitchen, stirred. He had absorbed Sophia's words, her harsh voice, her impatience, and he had captured Livia's silent lament. Suddenly, a sound scratched the silence. "I don't want any noise," Luro repeated, his voice perfectly mimicking Sophia's sharp tone. The phrase came out a little distorted, but undeniably recognizable. Sophia raised her head from the tablet, a frown of bewilderment on her forehead. She looked at the parrot, who stared back with his intelligent eyes. "Luro, quiet," she said, her voice a little softer but with an implicit warning. Livia, who had stopped fiddling with her food, looked at Luro, then at Sophia. She didn't understand what the parrot had said, but she felt a pang of curiosity. Sophia, noticing Livia's gaze, forced a smile. "Our Luro is a bit chatty today, isn't he, darling?" "Ish." But there was a glint of irritation in her eyes that Livia didn't fail to notice. Later, as Sophia prepared for a social outing, Livia was again in her room. The door was ajar, and she could hear Sophia's cheerful voice saying goodbye to someone on the phone. "Yes, a kiss. See you later." Livia approached the door, listening to Sophia's footsteps fade away. "I wish I had my mommy," she whispered, her voice laden with deep sadness. "I wish Daddy would stay home." In the living room, Luro was alone. He had heard, he had absorbed, and then he repeated with startling clarity, "I wish I had my mommy." The voice was small, choked, a perfect imitation of Livia's lament. Then, with a stronger tone, almost a command. "I don't want any noise." The parrot bobbed his head as if practicing a new melody. He was learning the symphony of cruelty and sadness and was ready to play it for anyone who would listen. The seed of truth was beginning to sprout, and Laura was the unexpected gardener. In Livia's room, the silence was so dense it seemed to have weight. The hours dragged on, each minute an eternity of loneliness. She tried to assemble a puzzle, but the colorful pieces blended in her mind like the confused emotions in her heart. The sun, which once invited her to play, now only illuminated the dust dancing in the air, a reminder that life outside continued without her. "I wish Daddy would stay," Livia whispered, her voice so faint it barely broke the silence. Her eyes, once bright, were now wells of sadness. She hugged her teddy bear, seeking a comfort he couldn't provide. Meanwhile, in the living room, Sophia paraded with the confidence of a queen. The phone was her crown, and conversations with her friends, her kingdom. "Yes, darling, Livia is a blessing, but so independent. She loves her reading moments. I encourage her imagination a lot," she said, her voice a silken thread, weaving an image of a devoted mother. Luro, in his cage, observed. His black, piercing eyes missed not a single detail of Sophia's performance. He heard the forced sweetness, the falsehood that dripped from her words. Later, Sophia, in an elegant dress, prepared to leave. "Livia, have you had lunch? I don't want any delays. I have an important engagement," she called, her voice impatient, from the bottom of the stairs. Livia came down, her steps hesitant. Lunch was a plate of vegetables, untouched. "I'm not hungry," Livia murmured, her eyes on the floor. Sophia sighed, a sound of contained irritation. "Livia, please, don't start that. Eat everything, and then straight to your room. I have to go out and I don't want any noise." Livia felt her stomach clench, but obeyed, pushing the food around her plate. The moment Sophia picked up her purse and turned to the door, Lauro, who had been moved to the dining room, let out a shrill sound. "I don't want any noise. Go to your room." The voice was an almost perfect imitation of Sophia's, with the same impatience and sharp tone. Sophia stopped, her hand on the doorknob. She turned, a frown of bewilderment and slight irritation on her forehead. "Lauro, quiet! What an annoying creature!" she grumbled, casting a warning glance at the bird before hurrying out. Livia, who had raised her head, looked at Lauro, a slight glint of curiosity in her eyes. She didn't understand the words, but she felt the tension in the air. The afternoon followed its monotonous course. Livia, back in her room, drew sad figures in her notebook. "I wish I had my mommy," she whispered again, tears streaming freely now that she was alone. At dusk, Ricardo returned. The scent of his woody cologne filled the house, bringing brief relief to Livia. Sophia was already home, greeting him with a warm embrace and a radiant smile. "My love, I'm so glad you're home. The day was exhausting, but it was worth it. Livia was an angel. She spent the day reading and drawing." Ricardo kissed Livia's forehead, who briefly nestled in his embrace. "How was your day, princess?" he asked, noticing his daughter's unusual quietness. "Good," Livia murmured, unable to look at Sophia. As Ricardo sat on the sofa taking off his shoes, Lauro from the living room stirred. He had absorbed the scene, Sophia's forced sweetness, Livia's contained sadness. Suddenly, the bird uttered a series of phrases. "I wish I had my mommy." Livia's small, tearful voice. Then, with a harsher, more impatient tone, "I don't want any noise. Go to your room." Ricardo stopped, untying his shoelace. He raised his head, a look of confusion on his face. He knew the phrases Lauro repeated, but the combination and the intonation were new. The tearful voice of "I wish I had my mommy" was unmistakable, and the harshness of "I don't want any noise" made him frown. Sophia, who was in the kitchen preparing a drink, heard. She froze for an instant, her smile tense. "Oh, that Luro. He's so talkative today, isn't he, my love? He must be missing you," she said, forcing a laugh and hurrying to the living room, trying to divert attention. Ricardo looked at the parrot, then at Sophia, who approached with the drink. He repeated something Livia said," Ricardo asked, his voice a little hesitant, the seed of doubt planted. "And that other phrase, it sounded so harsh." Sophia laughed again, a slightly higher-pitched sound. "What nonsense, Ricardo. Luro repeats everything he hears. He must have heard something on television or from a visitor. Livia is such a happy child, my love. You know how much she loves the house and her toys." She sat beside him, taking his hand, trying to dispel any questioning with her touch and her smile. But Ricardo wasn't entirely convinced. He looked at Luro, who was now silent, observing him with his intelligent eyes. The bird seemed to have a message, a story to tell, and Ricardo, for the first time, felt a shiver of discomfort. The melody of the house, which once seemed perfect, now had dissonant notes that Luro seemed to be revealing. The seed of truth had sprouted, and Ricardo, though still confused, was beginning to smell its bitter scent. That night, dinner at the Albuquerque mansion was permeated by a strange quietness. Livia barely touched her food, her eyes fixed on her plate, avoiding Sophia's gaze. Ricardo, in turn, observed everyone, his mind working at an accelerated pace. He noticed how Sophia, with a forced smile, tried to cheer Livia up, but the sweetness seemed not to reach the girl's eyes. "Livia, my love, eat a little more. You need to be strong," Sophia said, with a voice that to Ricardo now sounded a little artificial. "Your father had a long day and prepared a delicious dinner for us." Livia merely nodded, pushing a piece of meat with her fork. Ricardo felt a tightness in his chest. His daughter, usually so talkative and full of life, was withered. Suddenly, from the dining room, where Luro was in his cage, came a sound. "I can't stand you anymore. Go to your room." The voice was unmistakable, a perfect imitation of Sophia's irritated tone. A soft lament followed, almost a murmur. "I wish I had my mommy. Daddy." Ricardo's fork clattered onto his plate. He looked at Sophia, who had paled. Her smile crumbled, replaced by an expression of poorly disguised panic. Livia, who had been downcast until then, raised her eyes to Luro, a spark of something Ricardo couldn't decipher. Perhaps recognition, perhaps a glimmer of hope in her gaze. "Luro, what an unbearable creature!" Sophia exclaimed, her voice a little louder and more shrill than usual. She stood up abruptly, almost knocking over her chair. "Ricardo, I'm sorry. He must have heard that from some television program. It's unbelievable how he absorbs everything." Ricardo didn't respond immediately. He watched Sophia approach Luro's cage, which was now silent, merely observing the scene with his perceptive eyes. The stepmother tried to cover the cage with a cloth, but her hands trembled slightly. "No need to cover it, Sophia," Ricardo said, his voice calm, but with an authority that made her stop. "He's part of the family, and he doesn't usually repeat TV phrases with such intonation, especially not ones that sound so personal." Sophia turned, her eyes wide, trying to regain her composure. "Ricardo, my love, you're tired. Don't listen to a parrot. Livia, isn't it true that you adore Luro? He's a jokester." Livia shrugged, not answering. Ricardo noticed that she avoided Sophia's gaze at all costs. That behavior, combined with Luro's phrases, was a puzzle that was beginning to piece itself together in his mind. "Livia, my love, what do you think of the phrases Luro repeated?" Ricardo asked, his voice soft, directed only at his daughter. Livia clenched her hands under the table. I don't know, Daddy. He said, 'I wish I had my mommy and daddy.' Did you say that today?" Ricardo insisted, ignoring Sophia's warning glance. Livia hesitated for a long moment, her lips trembling. She looked at Sophia, then at her father, and finally at the floor. "Sometimes," she whispered so softly Ricardo barely heard. Ricardo's heart sank. The seed of doubt was now a robust plant with deep roots. Sophia's denial, Livia's quietness, and Luro's incriminating phrases formed a disturbing picture. He loved Sophia, trusted her, but the image of his daughter suffering in silence was unbearable. "Sophia, can we talk alone after dinner?" Ricardo said, his voice now colder. "Livia, you can go to your room, please." Livia stood up quickly, relieved, and ran upstairs. Sophia, on the other hand, seemed to have shrunk. The perfect smile had completely vanished, replaced by a mask of concern, and Ricardo realized a touch of fear. "Ricardo, what's happening?" Sophia asked, her voice choked, trying to sound offended. "Are you accusing me of something because of a parrot?" Ricardo stood up, walking to the window, looking at the dark garden. "I'm not accusing, Sophia, I'm observing. And what I'm observing and hearing doesn't please me. I need to know the truth. And if Luro is telling me a story, I will listen to it." He turned to her, his eyes serious. "Starting tomorrow, things will change in this house. I will find out what's happening with my daughter, and if someone is causing her sadness, that person will have to explain themselves." Sophia felt a shiver run down her spine. Ricardo's tone was unshakable. For the first time, she felt that her castle of lies was about to crumble. The parrot, that insignificant creature, was becoming her worst nightmare. Ricardo, in turn, was already formulating a plan. He needed irrefutable proof. He needed a trap. The night in the Albuquerque mansion was long and silent for Ricardo. He couldn't sleep, Luro's phrases and Livia's hesitant whisper echoing in his mind. The image of his daughter curled up, avoiding Sophia's gaze, was a dagger in his heart. He loved Sophia, or at least the woman she appeared to be, but Livia's well-being was his absolute priority. Trust had been broken, and now only the truth mattered. At dawn, Ricardo was already in his office, making discreet calls. He needed professional help, someone who could install an imperceptible surveillance system. Under the pretext of upgrading the house's security, an excuse Sophia would likely accept without question given the family's fortune, he hired a specialized team. The instruction was clear: hidden cameras and microphones in strategic points, especially in Livia's room, the living room and the kitchen, where interaction between stepmother and stepdaughter was most frequent. The system would be accessed remotely, allowing him to observe everything in real time, from his office or even his cell phone. The next morning, Ricardo came down for breakfast with an expression he hoped was neutral. Sophia was there, her smile a little more forced, her eyes slightly swollen, but still the personification of the perfect wife. "Good morning, my love," she said, kissing him on the cheek. "Did you sleep well?" "Had a few things on my mind," he replied, taking a piece of toast. "By the way, I arranged for a security company to come today. I want to check the systems, maybe install some new, more modern cameras. Can never be too careful. You know?" Sophia nodded, a subtle relief crossing her face. "Oh yes, of course. Great idea, my dear. Security is paramount. I'll make sure they have access to everything." She seemed relaxed, the tension of the previous night apparently dissipated by the plausible explanation. Ricardo felt a knot in his stomach. She was good, very good. Livia came down shortly after. Her small shoulders slumped. She barely touched her breakfast, responding in monosyllables to Ricardo's questions. Sophia, in turn, maintained the facade, encouraging the girl to eat with a tone that Ricardo now perceived as excessively sweet. "Livia, my love, eat your fruit. It's so healthy," Sophia said with a smile. "You need energy to play." Livia merely nodded, pushing a piece of melon. Ricardo observed the scene. the seed of truth growing in his chest. After breakfast, Ricardo prepared to leave for work. He kissed Livia's forehead and hugged Sophia. "I have an important meeting today. I might be a little late," he said, a carefully crafted lie. "The security technicians will arrive around 10. Please, Sophia, accompany them." "Leave it to me, my love. I'll take care of everything," she replied with a radiant smile. Ricardo left, but not for the office. He drove to a discreet cafe a few blocks away, where he would await confirmation of the equipment's installation. His heart pounded. With each passing minute, his anxiety mounted. He was about to discover the truth, and he feared what he would find. Around 11 in the morning, his cell phone vibrated. A message from the technician. "System installed and active. Tests completed. Everything working perfectly." Ricardo took a deep breath. It was time. He opened the app on his cell phone, and the image of his own living room appeared. The quality was impeccable. He could see Sophia sitting on the sofa, flipping through a magazine, and Livia on the floor, playing with her dolls, but with a quietness that was unnatural for a child her age. He switched cameras, checking Livia's room, the kitchen. Everything seemed normal, the house's routine unfolding. But Ricardo knew that the real test would begin when Sophia felt completely at ease, without her husband's presence to maintain the facade. He watched for hours, Livia's lunch, Sophia's attempt to make her eat. The sweetness was constant, but Livia's eyes seemed empty. Ricardo felt a pang of frustration. Where was the cruel stepmother Luro had revealed? The afternoon wore on. Livia went to her room, and Sophia, after a while, went upstairs too, probably to her own room or to make a call. Ricardo waited. The trap was set. Now, it was only a matter of time until the prey would reveal itself. Suddenly, the image from Livia's room showed movement. The door opened and Sophia entered. She wasn't smiling. Her face was contorted in an expression of impatience. "Livia, are you still playing with that doll? I already told you to put that away. And why aren't you studying? Your father will come home and ask what you did all day." Sophia's voice, captured by the hidden microphone, was cold and sharp, devoid of any sweetness. Livia shrank back, her eyes wide. I was playing, Sophia." "Playing? You should be reading or doing something useful. I don't want your father to think you're a useless child. Now put that away and get your book, and I don't want any noise." Ricardo felt his blood run cold in his veins. The voice, the intonation, it was exactly what Luro had imitated. He saw Livia, her hands trembling, begin to put away her toys, her lips pressed together to hold back tears. The trap had begun to work, and what Ricardo saw and heard was much worse than he imagined. Ricardo's blood ran cold in his veins. The voice, the intonation. It was exactly what Luro had imitated, but now, without the filter of animal imitation, it was even sharper, more cruel. He gripped his cell phone so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The image of Sophia, once the personification of the perfect wife, now crumbled into a cold, authoritarian figure. The sweet smile, the soft voice, everything was a charade. Livia, his little Livia, was living under this silent tyranny, and he, her father, was blind. Sophia remained in the room for a few more minutes, supervising Livia with a look of disapproval. "And I don't want you to leave this room until you finish reading 3 chapters. Your father doesn't pay for your school for you to play all day. Understood?" Livia merely nodded without raising her eyes. Sophia left, slamming the door with a dry snap that made the girl shrink back even further. Ricardo felt a wave of nausea. He switched to the living room camera. Sophia was there, picking up the phone, her face quickly assuming an expression of false sweetness. "Hi, my love. Yes, everything's great here. Livia is studying as always. Such a dedicated girl." Ricardo closed his eyes, feeling the bile rise in his throat. The hypocrisy was revolting. He spent the rest of the afternoon observing. Every interaction was a new blow to his heart. At lunch, Sophia reprimanded Livia for spilling a little juice, with a tone that, to an external observer, might seem merely educational, but which to Ricardo, now aware of the truth, was laden with contempt. "You're so clumsy, Livia. Can't you do anything right? Now clean up that mess and I don't want any more accidents." Livia cleaned, her eyes welling up, without complaining. Later, Sophia helped Livia with her homework, but the help consisted of constant criticism and impatience. "No, Livia, that's wrong again. Don't you pay attention. It's so simple. Your father will be disappointed with your grades." The words were like tiny needles pricking the child's self-esteem. Livia tried, her forehead furrowed, but the fear of making mistakes paralyzed her. Ricardo saw Livia isolate herself more and more, seeking refuge in her room, away from Sophia's eyes and voice. The girl spent hours in silence, playing alone or just staring into space, a shadow of her former vivacity. That behavior, which Ricardo once attributed to shyness or grief for her mother, now revealed its true cause, the terror imposed by her stepmother. The sun began to set, painting the sky orange and purple. Ricardo hadn't moved from the cafe, his cell phone in his hands, the screen reflecting the growing darkness in his heart. He had the proof, he had the truth, and it was much worse than any nightmare. He thought of Lauro. The parrot, with his peculiar intelligence, had been the only one to see, the only one to try to warn him. "I wish I had my mommy. Daddy, useless child. I don't want any noise." All the phrases now made a painful and complete sense. Lauro wasn't an annoying creature. He was a guardian angel disguised as a bird. Rage simmered in Ricardo, mixed with overwhelming guilt. How could he have been so blind? How could he have allowed his daughter to suffer so much under the same roof while he worked, trusting the woman who swore to love him and care for his family? He couldn't wait any longer. The trap had captured the prey, and now it was time to act. Ricardo knew he needed to confront Sophia, but not impulsively. He needed a plan, one that would guarantee Livia's safety above all else and expose Sophia irrefutably, without her having a chance to manipulate the situation or play the victim. He started the car, the engine roaring in the twilight silence. He wasn't going to the office. He was going home, but not to be the naive husband who left that morning. He would be the father who had awakened, the avenger who would bring the truth to light. From that moment on, Sophia Albuquerque's life was about to change drastically, and Livia's, finally, would begin to see the light. The car's engine roared, but Ricardo barely heard it. His mind was in a whirlwind, the images and sounds from his cell phone repeating in a cruel loop. "Useless child. I don't want any noise. Can't you do anything right?" Sophia's words, once disguised by artificial sweetness, now resonated with the brutality they truly possessed. And Livia, his little Livia, curled up, her eyes welling up, paralyzed by fear. A sharp pain pierced Ricardo's chest, a mixture of rage, guilt, and deep sadness. So naive. He had built an empire, negotiated with the shrewdest businessmen, but failed miserably to protect the most important person in his life. The woman he loved, whom he believed to be the personification of kindness, was a monster in disguise. Sophia's hypocrisy was a slow poison, corroding his daughter's soul, and he, her father, had allowed it. Ricardo's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white. The cafe, the smell of ground beans, and the bustle of the street, everything seemed distant, unreal. The only reality was his cell phone screen, the irrefutable proof of the cruelty unfolding in his own home. He thought of Lauro, the parrot. How many times had the bird tried to warn him, repeating phrases that now made such a terrifying sense? he had ignored, laughed, attributed it to the animal's annoyance. Lauro wasn't annoying. He was the voice of truth, the only one who saw what he refused to see. Guilt choked him. Livia had lost her mother too soon, and he had promised to protect her, love her, give her the best possible life. Instead, he had handed her over to a woman who despised her. The hours he spent observing, every reprimand, every cold glance, every sharp word, accumulated into an unbearable burden. Livia wasn't shy, she was terrified. She wasn't quiet, she was silenced. Ricardo knew he couldn't simply walk into the house and explode. Sophia was cunning, a master of manipulation. She would play the victim, deny everything, try to turn the situation against him. He had the recordings, yes, but he needed a plan that would guarantee Livia's safety above all else and expose Sophia definitively, without room for doubt or reversals. He drove aimlessly for a few minutes, trying to organize his thoughts. First, Livia. She needed to be removed from that environment immediately. Then, the confrontation. It wouldn't be an argument, but an unveiling. He needed witnesses, support, his lawyers, perhaps. But first and foremost, he needed to be calm, cold, so as not to give Sophia any advantage. The sun had already set completely when Ricardo turned onto his street. The mansion's lights shone, inviting and deceptive. The house, which once represented his refuge and his success, now seemed like a golden cage. He parked the car and turned off the engine, the heavy silence filling the space. He took a deep breath, trying to control the fury boiling in his veins. As he got out of the car, his eyes fixed on Livia's bedroom window. A small light was on. Was she reading, as Sophia had ordered? Or was she crying in silence, wishing for the mother she no longer had? Ricardo was no longer the blind husband and distracted father who had left that morning. He was a man transformed by pain and rage, a father with a mission. He would expose Sophia, whatever the cost, and above all, he would rescue his daughter. From that moment on, war was declared, and Ricardo was ready to fight for Livia. As he opened the front door, the aroma of a freshly prepared dinner filled his nostrils, an attempt at normalcy that now seemed grotesque to him. Sophia appeared in the living room, a radiant smile on her face, her arms open for a hug. "My love, I'm so glad you're home. Dinner is almost ready. Livia was asking about you." Her voice was sweet, melodic, the same voice that, hours earlier, he had heard spew venom. Ricardo forced a smile, feeling every muscle in his face protest. Sophia's embrace felt like a snake's squeeze. "Yes, it was a long day," he managed to murmur, his voice sounding strangely hoarse to his own ears. He gently pushed her away, avoiding prolonged eye contact. "Where's Livia?" "Oh, she's in her room, finishing her reading. Such a dedicated girl, isn't she? Always with her books," Sophia replied with a tone of pride that made Ricardo's stomach churn. He knew that dedicated was just a pretty word for forced and terrified. "I'll go check on her before dinner," Ricardo said, already heading to the hallway. Sophia didn't seem to mind, returning to the kitchen with a cheerful humming. Ricardo climbed the stairs, each step feeling like a weight on his soul. Livia's bedroom door was ajar. He peeked in. Livia was sitting on the bed, a book open on her lap, but her eyes were fixed on the opposite wall, empty and distant. The parrot Lauro was in his cage, in the corner of the room, silently observing the girl. When Ricardo entered, Lauro turned his head, his intelligent eyes fixed on the man. For a brief instant, Ricardo felt that the bird understood him, that they were silent accomplices. "Hi, my love," Ricardo whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed. Livia startled, her eyes wide with surprise and a slight fear. "Daddy!" "Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice soft, trying not to scare her. He wanted to hug her, take her away from there, but he knew he couldn't act impulsively. Livia nodded, clutching the book. "Yes, Daddy, I was reading." "All right," Dinner will be ready soon. How about you come down in about 5 minutes, he suggested, standing up. He kissed her forehead, feeling the fragility of her skin. I love you, Livia. The girl looked at him, a spark of surprise and something akin to hope in her eyes. I love you too, Daddy. Ricardo left the room, his heart heavy. He needed to be strong. He needed to be cunning. In his office, he locked the door. He took out his cell phone and dialed his lawyer, Dr. Almeida. Almeida, I need you. It's urgent. Can we meet tomorrow morning, very early? And I need you to prepare the documentation for a protective order and an immediate custody request. I have irrefutable proof of neglect and emotional abuse. His voice was cold, calculating, devoid of emotion. On the other end of the line, the lawyer, accustomed to Ricardo's calm, perceived the gravity of the situation. Of course, Ricardo. I'll be at the office at 7. What's happening? Tomorrow you'll know everything. Please be discreet. No one can know about this yet, especially Sophia. He hung up the phone, feeling a chill down his spine. The plan was beginning. He wouldn't confront Sophia tonight. He would sleep under the same roof as her, pretending to be the loving husband, while inside the war had already begun. Tomorrow at dawn, the mask would fall, and Sophia Albuquerque would have nowhere to run. Ricardo descended the stairs, the smell of dinner now mixed with the sweet fragrance of Sophia's perfume, a combination that once calmed him and now made him nauseous. He found her in the kitchen, stirring a pot with an impeccable apron, the image of the perfect wife. Ricardo, my love, sit down. Everything's ready, she said, turning with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. To Ricardo, that smile was a mask, a rehearsed performance for the audience she believed him to be. Livia was already sitting at the table, small and silent, her downcast eyes fixed on the empty plate. Ricardo sat opposite her, feeling the weight of Sophia's gaze on him. How was your day, my dear? Sophia asked, serving him a generous portion of risotto. You seem a little thoughtful. It was exhausting, Ricardo replied, forcing himself to pick up his cutlery. He couldn't give her any clues. Many meetings, important decisions. Oh, my poor husband, you work too much, she said, with a tone of false concern. But don't worry, I take care of everything here. Livia and I had a quiet day, didn't we, darling? Livia looked up for an instant, met Ricardo's gaze, and then quickly averted her eyes to Sophia, giving a small nod. Yes, stepmother. Ricardo's heart clenched. The word stepmother sounded like a formal title, devoid of any affection. He forced himself to eat, each mouthful feeling like sand in his mouth. He watched Livia, who barely touched her food, and Sophia, who maintained her impeccable posture, chatting about trivialities, about weekend plans, about the renovation she wanted to do in the living room. Each word from her was a stab, a reminder of the charade he had lived. Livia, eat a little more, darling. You need to be strong, Sophia said, with a tone that to Ricardo's ears now sounded like a veiled threat, not an encouragement. Livia took another spoonful of risotto, swallowing it with difficulty. Ricardo felt a wave of anger so intense that he had to clench his hands under the table to keep from exploding. He needed to be strong for Livia. Dinner ended in a tense silence for Ricardo, though Sophia seemed oblivious, humming as she collected the dishes. He said goodbye to Livia with a quick kiss, whispering a good night that he hoped carried all his love and the promise of rescue. In the bedroom, Ricardo pretended to be reading some work documents. Sophia entered, wearing a silk nightgown, and snuggled beside him. You're so distant today, my love. Did something happen that you don't want to tell me? He felt her scent, the warmth of her body, and the revulsion was almost unbearable. No, Sophia, just tiredness. It's a difficult phase at the company. He kissed her forehead, a cold, passionless kiss, and turned to his side, pretending to fall asleep quickly. The night was long and sleepless. Ricardo lay awake, listening to Sophia's regular breathing beside him. His mind raced, replaying every detail of the plan, every phrase from the recordings, every tear from Livia. He got up before dawn, dressed in silence, and left a note on the nightstand for Sophia, saying he had an emergency meeting. As he passed Livia's room, the door was ajar. He peeked in. The girl slept curled up, one arm hugging a teddy bear. Beside the bed, in the cage, Luro was perched, his eyes closed. Ricardo felt a pang of guilt for having to leave her there for a few more hours, but he knew it was necessary. "Hold on tight, my love," he whispered, a silent promise. He drove to Dr. Almeida's office, the street still empty under the pale light of dawn. The lawyer was already waiting for him, with a serious expression on his face. "Ricardo, you alarmed me with the urgency. What's happening?" Dr. Almeida asked, gesturing to a chair. Ricardo wasted no time. "Almeida, I need you to hear this, and I need you to help me get my daughter out of that house today." He took his cell phone from his pocket and placed it on the table, pressing play. Sophia's voice, cold and cruel, filled the room. "You're useless, Livia. You're good for nothing. Your father doesn't love you. He just puts up with you." Then came Livia's muffled sobs and the parrot's voice, repeating the phrases. Dr. Almeida listened in silence, his expression alternating between shock and indignation. When the recording ended, a heavy silence hung in the air. "My God, Ricardo," the lawyer finally managed to say, his voice choked. It's monstrous. And the parrot. It's unbelievable." "I have more," Ricardo said, showing the other recordings. "Hours of material, irrefutable proof, as I said, neglect, emotional abuse, psychological terror, all recorded. And I have witnesses, though they don't know they are. The employees who saw Livia's isolation, the parrot who repeats everything." Dr. Almeida took a deep breath, composing himself. "Ricardo, this is a very strong case. With these recordings, we can obtain an emergency protective order and provisional custody of Livia immediately. Sophia will have no defense. The bird's testimony, though unusual, is corroborated by the recordings and your own observation." "What do we need to do?" Ricardo asked, his voice firm, but his heart beating erratically. "I will draft the custody request and the protective order right now. We will file them with the court as soon as it opens. We need a court officer to accompany you to the house. Sophia will be notified and Livia will be removed from there under judicial protection. There will be no room for her to manipulate the situation or try to flee with the girl." Ricardo nodded, feeling a mix of relief and a cold adrenaline run through his veins. The plan was in motion. Sophia's mask would fall, and Livia, finally, would be safe. The war had begun, and Ricardo was ready for the final battle. Ricardo and Dr. Almeida left the office, the morning silence broken only by the sound of their hurried footsteps. The lawyer, with the folder of documents in hand, seemed to have aged 10 years in an hour, the gravity of the situation weighing on him. They arrived at the courthouse just before opening, Ricardo's urgency conveying itself to the staff. In a private room, a duty judge reviewed the recordings and documents with an expression of growing horror. Sophia's voice, Livia's pleas, Luro's repetitions, everything was undeniable. "Mr. Albuquerque, the evidence is compelling," the judge declared, his voice grave. "I will issue the emergency protective order and provisional custody of the child immediately. Ms. Sophia Albuquerque will be notified and prohibited from approaching the minor. A court officer will accompany you to the residence to ensure the execution of the order." The relief Ricardo felt was almost physical, but quickly replaced by a renewed tension. The moment of truth was near. In less than an hour, Ricardo was in the back seat of an official car beside Dr. Almeida. A court officer, a sturdy man with a serious demeanor, drove towards his house. The silence inside the vehicle was dense, laden with expectation. Ricardo looked out the window, the houses passing like blurs, each one a home, a sanctuary. His own, however, had become a prison for his daughter. "We're almost there, Mr. Albuquerque," the officer announced, breaking the silence. Ricardo's heart pounded against his ribs. He felt an overwhelming mix of fury and anxiety, but above all, an unshakable determination. Livia would be free. They arrived at the mansion. Ricardo opened the automatic gate with the remote control, and the official car entered the property, stopping in front of the main door. The scent of Sophia's roses, once a symbol of her perfection, now seemed suffocating. Ricardo got out of the car, followed by Almeida and the officer. He used his key to open the door, entering the house that for so many years had harbored his blindness. Sophia was in the living room, sitting on the sofa, flipping through a decorating magazine, a steaming cup of coffee on the coffee table. She looked up, a smile forming on her lips as she saw him. "Ricardo, my love, what a surprise to have you back so early." Was the meeting quick? Her voice was sweet, melodic, the image of the perfect wife. Her smile froze when her eyes fell upon the court officer and Dr. Almeida. The magazine slipped from her hands, falling onto the Persian rug. What's happening here?" she asked, her voice losing its sweetness, replaced by a tone of confusion and irritation. Ricardo stepped forward, his voice cold and firm, devoid of any emotion. "Sophia, it's over. The charade is over." The court officer with a folder in hand stepped forward. "Miss Sophia Albuquerque, I'm Officer Silva. I'm here to notify you of a court order for a protective order and provisional custody of the minor Livia Albuquerque." Sophia's face paled. "Court order? Custody? What are you talking about? Ricardo, what is this? Are you crazy?" She turned to him, her eyes wide with disbelief and fury. "Are you playing a trick on me? Is this some kind of bad taste joke?" "It's no joke. Sophia," Ricardo replied, his voice icy. "It's reality. The reality you hid for so long. I didn't hide anything. I'm a dedicated mother, an exemplary wife. Livia loves me. She's a difficult child, yes, but I always did my best." Sophia stood up, her posture defensive, her eyes flashing. "This is absurd. I'm calling my lawyer." "He's here," Ricardo pointed to Dr. Almeida. "But he won't be able to help you. The evidence is irrefutable." At that moment, Livia, drawn by the noise, appeared at the top of the stairs, her eyes curious and slightly scared. She was holding her teddy bear. Seeing her, Sophia tried to compose herself, forcing a smile. "Livia, my love, come here. Your father is with some strange friends," she said, extending her hand. But before Livia could take a step, a familiar voice echoed from the cage in the dining room, which was visible from the living room. Luro, who had been moved to the dining room to not bother Sophia while she read, was perched, observing the scene with his intelligent eyes. "Useless, Livia! You're good for nothing! Your father doesn't love you!" Luro repeated in a shrill voice, perfectly mimicking Sophia's cruel tone. "Bad stepmother! Bad stepmother!" Sophia froze, the blood draining from her face. The court officer and Dr. Almeida exchanged shocked glances. Livia, at the top of the stairs, shrank slightly upon hearing the words, but her eyes fixed on the parrot, then on Ricardo. "What is that?" Sophia whispered, her voice choked, looking at the parrot with horror. "That, Sophia, is your truth," Ricardo said, taking his cell phone from his pocket. "I have hours of it, every cruel word, every humiliation, every tear from my daughter, all recorded, and Luro is your most faithful witness." He pressed play, and Sophia's cold voice filled the room again, followed by Livia's muffled sobs and the parrot's repetitions. Sophia staggered, her face contorted in a mixture of fury and despair. She tried to lunge at Ricardo, but the court officer intervened, placing himself between them. "Madam, please remain calm. The court order is clear. The minor Livia Albuquerque will be removed from this residence under judicial protection." Livia, seeing her father, ran down the stairs and threw herself into Ricardo's arms, who hugged her tightly, feeling her small body tremble. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice muffled. "It's all right, my love. Daddy's here. You're safe now," Ricardo promised, kissing the top of her head. Sophia, defeated, collapsed onto the sofa, her eyes fixed on Lauro, who, as if aware of his victory, repeated one last time in a softer tone, almost a lament. "Daddy loves you, Livia. Daddy loves you." Sophia's mask had fallen, and Ricardo, with Livia in his arms, felt that the war finally had come to an end. The silence, broken only by Livia's muffled crying in Ricardo's arms and Sophia's heavy breathing, was deafening. Sophia, still on the sofa, seemed to have shrunk, her face a mask of defeat and hatred. Her eyes, once filled with a calculating glint, now burned with impotent fury, fixed on Ricardo and his daughter. This is a setup, a conspiracy to take everything from me," she shrieked, her voice hoarse, trying to stand up again. The court officer, Mr. Silva, stepped forward, his presence imposing. "Miss Albuquerque, the court order is clear. You must refrain from any contact with the minor Livia Albuquerque. Any attempt to approach her will be considered contempt of court and will result in more severe legal consequences." He extended an envelope. "This is the formal notification. You have 24 hours to vacate the residence, taking only your personal belongings. Your lawyers will be contacted to discuss the next steps." Sophia tore the envelope, the paper fragments falling like snow from her trembling hands. "Vacate? This is my house. I'm not going anywhere. You can't do this, Ricardo." Ricardo hugged Livia closer. "This house is no longer yours, Sophia, and it was never a home for my daughter. You lost the right to be here the moment you hurt her." His voice was cold steel, leaving no room for negotiation. Livia, still with her face hidden in her father's chest, sobbed softly. The fear was still there, but the feeling of Ricardo's strong arms around her promised protection. She felt a warmth in her chest she hadn't felt in a long time. Dr. Almeida, who observed the scene with a somber expression, intervened. "Ms. Albuquerque, I suggest you cooperate. The evidence is overwhelming. Any resistance will only worsen your situation." Sophia cast a look of pure venom at the lawyer, then at Lauro, who was strangely silent now, as if his mission was accomplished. "That filthy bird, he'll pay for this." "Lauro is coming with us," Ricardo declared, anticipating any attempt by Sophia to harm the parrot. "He's part of the family, and a crucial witness." Officer Silva nodded. "Mr. Albuquerque, it's time to go. The child's safety is the priority." Ricardo kissed Livia's head. "We're going to a real home now, my love." He turned to the officer. "Please make sure Lauro is taken safely." As Ricardo, with Livia in his arms, walked towards the door, Sophia stood up, her eyes bloodshot. "You'll regret this, Ricardo. I'll fight. I'll take everything from you." Ricardo didn't turn around. He just kept walking, the sound of Sophia's threats fading behind them. The air outside felt lighter, purer. The official car waited. Dr. Almeida was already in the back seat. Officer Silva, with the help of one of the house's security guards, who observed everything with an expression of contained relief, carefully brought Lauro's cage. The parrot, seeing Livia and Ricardo in the car, let out a soft chirp, almost a "Daddy loves you, Livia," before being placed in the trunk, safely. In the car, Livia nestled in Ricardo's lap, her teddy bear clutched tightly. She wasn't crying anymore, but her eyes were red and swollen. Ricardo hugged her, feeling her small body relax gradually. "Where are we going, Daddy?" she asked, her voice weak, but with a touch of curiosity. "To a safe place, my love, where you'll never be afraid again, where you'll be happy again," Ricardo replied, kissing her forehead. "We're going to Grandma's house for now. She's eager to see you." Livia smiled a little, a small and fragile smile, but a smile. The idea of her grandmother, who always treated her with affection, was a balm. Dr. Almeida, in the back seat, observed the scene with a lump in his throat. It was a difficult day, Ricardo, but the most important thing was done. Livia is safe. Yes, Ricardo agreed, looking at his daughter, who already seemed calmer. And now the hardest part, healing the wounds. He knew the road would be long, but the first and most crucial battle had been won. Livia was free, and he was there, ready to rebuild everything brick by brick, love by love. The morning sun, now stronger, bathed the car, promising a new day. Lauro, in the trunk, let out a satisfied chirp. "Livia free! Daddy loves you!" The car glided smoothly down the road, leaving behind the mansion that for so long had been a stage of disguised cruelty. Livia, nestled in Ricardo's arms, felt the warmth of her father's body, a safe harbor she had forgotten existed. The crying had ceased, but sobs still shook her small body from time to time. She clutched her teddy bear against her chest, her eyes half closed, exhausted. Ricardo held her with a protective strength, kissing her soft hair. The scent of baby shampoo and the warmth of his daughter were a balm for his wounded soul. He felt an overwhelming mix of relief and guilt. Relief for finally having seen the truth and rescued Livia, and guilt for having allowed Sophia's charade to last so long. In the back seat, Dr. Almeida observed the scene with a mix of sadness and satisfaction. Justice, albeit late, was being served. "Grandma is very happy to see you, Livia," he said, his voice soft, trying to break the heavy silence. Livia raised her head, her swollen eyes meeting Ricardo's. "Will she make cookies?" she asked, her voice an almost inaudible whisper. Ricardo smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, but that was sincere. "Lots of cookies, my love. And she'll hug you so much you'll forget all your fears." The car stopped in front of a smaller but cozy house, with a flowery garden and a charming porch, the house of Livia's grandmother, Donna Helena. The door opened before Ricardo could even ring the doorbell, revealing a lady with white hair and kind eyes, her face marked by worry and now by evident relief. "My darlings!" Donna Helena exclaimed, her arms open. Livia, seeing her grandmother, slipped from Ricardo's arms and ran to her, who enveloped her in a tight hug. "My granddaughter, my love! I'm so glad you're here, my little bird." Livia buried her face in her grandmother's shoulder, feeling the familiar scent of lavender and affection. It was a scent of home, of safety. For the first time in a long time, she felt that she could breathe. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Officer Silva and his men ensured that Sophia complied with the court order. Her fury had transformed into a cold, calculating hatred. "This won't stand! I'll sue Ricardo! I'll destroy his reputation!" she screamed, as her belongings were packed under the watchful eye of the officers. Her hateful gaze fell upon Lauro's empty cage. That cursed bird. But Lauro was safe, in the trunk of Ricardo's car, now being carefully brought into the grandmother's house. Upon being placed in the living room, he observed Livia, who was sitting on her grandmother's lap, eating a cookie. The parrot let out a chirp, and then, with his shrill voice but now filled with a different tone, repeated, "Grandma loves you. Livia happy." Livia looked at Lauro, and a small smile, genuine and full of light, illuminated her face. It was the first true smile Ricardo had seen from her in years. He felt a lump in his throat, but it was a lump of hope. Donna Helena stroked Livia's hair. "You're safe now, my love. No one will hurt you here." Ricardo knelt beside them, taking Livia's small hand. "I promise, my love, never again. I will take care of you. Always." Livia looked at her father, then at her grandmother, and at Lauro, who continued to repeat, "Livia happy." She knew that the road to healing the wounds would be long, but for the first time, She wasn't alone. She had her father, her grandmother, and her faithful feathered friend. Night fell, bringing with it a peace that Grandma's house exuded. Livia fell asleep in the soft bed, with her teddy bear and Luro in his cage beside the bed nearby. Ricardo watched her sleep, his heart heavy, but also filled with a new determination. The war had ended, and the reconstruction of his daughter and of his own life was just beginning. He knew it would be a long process, full of challenges, but he was ready. He was there. And Livia, finally, was free. The morning sun, which would soon rise, would bring with it not only a new day, but a new chance for all of them.